Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now one thing I will definitely tell you is probably for the next 3 or 4 years, this phone is going to be a very good phone. It is easily still one of the most probably powerful phones out in the marketplace right now, and you cannot go wrong with this phone at all. So still a very good phone for sure. If you want to pick this device up, links will be down in the description. You can get this phone from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of this phone, specifically the display, this phone has a 6.8 inch dynamic AMOLED display. It's a very good panel, 1440p, and I will definitely tell you Samsung did a really good job with this specific device. I mean, the panel of this thing is still very good, and I don't really see how too many phones probably in the future could top this specific display. I think Samsung did a great job, and I think probably going up into the S23 Ultra and these next couple of phones, Samsung is just going to kill it in my opinion. So definitely with the display, another cool thing about it is that it actually does kind of taper off to the edges. So it's a curved display on the sides and it's kind of like a rectangular phone. So it's almost like a block. And that's actually one thing I liked about this phone. It reminds me a lot of the Pixel 7 Pro and the original Galaxy Notes, like the last couple of Galaxy Notes, the last ones. I love the styling of phones and I kind of do miss it from the Note lineup, to be honest. So have the hole punch display, you still have the fingerprint sensor in the display too, which is nice. On the bottom, you have a USB Type-C port, which has Samsung DeX within it, so that is really cool. So you can go ahead and connect it to another monitor and use it pretty much as a separate machine, which is actually a really nice touch. Now on top of that, the big thing here that I actually do like a lot is that you actually do have a S Pen built into this specific device, which that in and of itself is really cool. As I mentioned before, having that S Pen just built in right inside of that phone is awesome. The S21 Ultra had, also had the S Pen capability, but it was actually built inside of that. It wasn't built inside of that phone. It was just like an accessory you could have on the outside. Personally, I felt like that was cool, but it wasn't like the most ideal situation to be in. With this approach, I think it definitely works out a lot better. And I definitely do think Samsung did a way better job with this specific device than they did with the S21 Ultra, just because the S Pen was built into this specific phone. Now on the back of this phone, we do have this frosted glass back, which looks and feels very, very good. As I mentioned before, I think Samsung did a really good job during these moments, and I think this is no exception. I think they did a tremendous job in this specific situation, and I do think it still holds up very well, on top of that. Now, on top of that, you do have, the quadruple, triple, I don't even know what type of, 5-angled camera that this thing is. It's a super solid camera. It has tons of features. We'll talk about that in a second. You had a wireless charging on this phone, reverse wireless charging on this device. You had pretty much everything you'd ever need inside of a phone here. This was a very good phone with so much capability, it's not even funny. So at the end of the day, every single time I look at this device, I always think to myself that Samsung just knocked it out of the park. Again, it was a little bit more pricier than a lot of other phones, but with that extra price, you are getting an extra phone, in my opinion. That's kind of the best way to kind of think about it. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, as I mentioned before, you are getting a really good camera setup on this thing. It's a quadruple camera setup. So you're getting a 108 megapixel wide angle lens, a 10 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, a 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And on the front, you're getting a 40 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, here's the thing. With this type of phone, a lot of these numbers are super big and you probably don't need these many megapixels, but I think definitely when it comes down to it, this is a very good camera, probably one of the best cameras you could probably buy last year. I still want to throw the caveat in there though, that if you're still doing applications like Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, and you're using those native cameras, built in within them, you're not taking your photos separately, you're posting photos straight from the apps, you can get into some weird situations where the videos may not look the best. But even then, it's not that big of a deal even with these types of cameras. These videos and photos you can pull from this type of camera is amazing. There's just so much capability behind this lens. You have so many features built in, and even with the S20 Ultra, I still think to myself how great of a job Samsung did with that phone. It's almost like quadruple the amount of capability when it comes down to this device. And I do think at the end of the day, there's just too many features built in here for it to kind of flop in a way. And because the hardware of these cameras are just so good, I think Samsung's done a great job in this specific situation. So in my opinion, it definitely gets a thumbs up for me from both the front and the wide camera. Again, it's not perfect, but I definitely do think Samsung did a really, really good job with this specific phone at the end of the day. So in terms of that, it definitely gets a thumbs up for me for sure. Now in the software and the longevity portion of this device, this is the one area where I've always been a little critical of Samsung phones, but I do think they have gotten better throughout time, and even now, we're in a good spot. You know, I feel like personally with the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, you can use this phone for many, many years. Like, this phone is not going anywhere anytime soon, so you can theoretically still use this phone for like 3, 4, 5 more years and still feel like you have a pretty decent phone. And that is something that may be hard to find with other devices out there. Personally, when I've owned other phones, maybe like a Samsung Galaxy S10, an S9, an S8, I've always kind of felt like, you know, is this phone still going to get the next version of software? Like, we don't know. In these cases, we do know. Like, we do know this phone is going to last for many years. So there's really not too much to complain about with this phone in that perspective. So I feel like in the software and the longevity portion of these devices, it's not as crazy of a difference as they used to be. So it definitely gets a thumbs up from you for sure there. Now, in the performance segment, this phone does have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset inside with 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, but it does go up to 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now, again, this is another case where I would look at this phone and be like, you know, even though this phone, even the base model at 8 gigs, this is still a very, very powerful phone. I mean, it has just so much power built within it. But I will say one thing I didn't like about this phone last year was that I think the base model of last year's phone had 12 gigabytes of RAM, and now they went down to 8. I don't really understand why they did that. Well, I understand why they did that, but I just didn't really like how they did it. And in this case, I mean, even in that 8 gigabyte of RAM, it's still a very powerful phone for sure. I mean, this phone at the end of the day can pretty much do everything you'd probably ever want to, and then some. I've probably used the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset the most last year, more than any other chipset before. I mean, I've used it on like so many different phones, and at the performance of this device, you know, of these devices with that chipset, it's very good. I've done lots of gaming on this type of device as well, and it's definitely a very, very smooth performing phone, very good performing phone as well. But I will say, from everything that I've heard, personally for me, again, I'm not using these phones like every single day. I use an iPhone for the most part, but I will say the biggest complaint, I think from what I've heard, was sometimes the performance to battery ratio of the phones would overheat a little bit, but I think that was fixed with the Snapdragon 8 Gen Plus 1 chipset, and I think with the 8 Gen 2 that's completely fixed it. So I'm really excited for the next generation of, you know, devices, but I do think this is still one of the better performing phones you can definitely buy for sure. Now, ending it off, this thing has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. It's a wireless, you know, reverse wireless charging as well, which is really cool. And I still think this is a very good performing battery life as well. Like, you can't really go wrong with phones that are this big and have this big of a size battery as well. So it's almost like, you know, it's just like a really good size battery when it comes down to it. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll definitely tell you is, I think the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra is a very, very good phone. I think Samsung did a great job when it first came out, and I still think they've done a great job. Like, I still think this phone is completely worth it, and it still has a lot of quality, still has a lot of power within it, and I think that is probably one of the more important things when you get a phone like this to kind of keep in mind. So I think this phone is still completely worth it. If you want to save some money, you can always buy an S21 Ultra and pretty much go down that direction. But even then, you can't go wrong at all with buying an S21 Ultra, an S20 Ultra, even if you really want to save some extra money. But if you have the money, going up to the S22 Ultra would probably make the most amount of sense for me. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.